All right, good day to everybody. Welcome to another edition of Calmly Considered. I am Alan Bevere. I am the Anselm of Canterbury, I should say the self-appointed Anselm of Canterbury Chair of Theology and of Podcast Theology and Culture here at Faith Seeking Understanding University, totally made up by me, just to let you know. Unaccredited, but nevertheless, we are an entity. I don't know what kind of entity we are. And Michael, I'm going to introduce you because you need to save me from going out in flame here real fast. Michael Cruz is my conversation partner, and he's the Grand Poobah Chair of Economics and Public Theology here at FSUU, where we have yet to get a mascot. Of course, we probably need a basketball team first. So I'm a little old for that. But anyway, Michael, it is great to see you. And so we always have to talk sports a little bit at the beginning.
Yes.
We just do.
Yes.
So obviously the boys of summer are playing, and baseball is, as I have said, is the greatest sport, greatest game ever invented.
Yes.
And I know you follow your Royals very closely.
Mm-hmm.
How are they doing? What's your thoughts?
Not well at the moment.
Yeah.
We have a major power outage. Nobody can hit the baseball right now. So we had a game not yesterday, the day before, where they did really well. Other than that, for the past 7 or 8 games, they've just been horrible. So
yeah, the Guardians are struggling too with that. I said if they're new named the Guardians, they're not doing a good job of being guardians of the ball. But we'll see how that goes. It's just nice to have baseball, though, isn't it? It's nice to go to a game.
Would be nice though when I can go see a game and it's more than 50 degrees outside.
Well, I know that's
nice.
part of the problem. That's part of the problem. And
right.
So hopefully very soon we'll be in the warmth of this. All right. So our topic for today is the demise of democracy and the rise of authoritarianism. Now, the word demise is probably a little too harsh. We got a lot of strong democracies in the world, and but there clearly has been more of a willingness, and it's not just within the last few years. I mean, it's probably been increased in the last 6 or 7 years, but it's been going on for a little bit of time, and that people are. Let me say it this way: some people seem to be less enamored with democracy, and much more willing to put their future into the hands of someone who I'm going to say has authoritarian proclivities. We need to define that in a little bit, of course, and what that means, because the other thing is authoritarianism you can't point your finger at one thing and say, this is authoritarianism. It's really a combination of things. Is that correct? Isn't that correct?
I would think so. Yeah. I mean, when I think of authoritarianism, I think of centralized control, usually in the power of an individual, sometimes maybe an oligarchy. They tend to not value pluralism. And then they tend to relegate or destroy the rule of law. They're not thrilled on separation of powers, don't like accountability to other institutional structures, and democratic voting is often reduced to a sham. That when I think of a full-on authoritarian state, it generally shares most of those qualities when I think about it. Free press is also another big threat. And of course, you don't have to be too much of a deep student of history to see where these authoritarian governments have given birth, and the trick is it not, Michael, for us to see the authoritarian things that are starting to germinate in our own culture, right?
The reality is, here's the reality. Most human beings, I mean, we don't willfully say, I'm going to give an authoritarian power. Nobody says what we need is a good dictator, right? When you look at, for example, Nazi Germany, and I'm going to be very careful because we We're not going to compare people to Nazis. That's a very,
Yeah.
you have to be very careful about that comparison. But Nazism really started out as authoritarianism, right?
Sure,
I mean, the vast majority of Christians in Germany, a lot of them willfully elected, Adolf Hitler, put him in power. They were sincere people, right?
Mhm.
They didn't wake up in the morning and say, let's put somebody in power that's going to end up causing a world war and murdering 6 million Jews, right? Nobody does.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
They really felt like he was the one, and they thought he would be good for Germany. Okay, so it's not an issue of sincerity, is it? It's an issue of us even being willing to, even for me, let me make it personal for me. I need to be willing to critique myself in where I am perhaps giving some room for people with these kinds of authoritarian characteristics, even though I'm well-intentioned.
Right. I think that's absolutely right.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk. Okay, so you talked about pluralism. Let's talk about the thing that has sort of given rise to this. And one of the articles, and you wrote, in fact, a blog post you wrote in 2017, you sent to me on the book Runaway World.
Right.
Globalization is reshaping our lives. One of the things you say in this post is that that the author writes, and let me quote what you say, the battleground of the 21st century will pit fundamentalism against cosmopolitan tolerance.
Yeah.
In the globalizing world where information and images are routinely transmitted across the globe, we are all regularly in contact with others who think differently and live differently from ourselves. Cosmopolitans welcome and embrace this cultural complexity. Fundamentalists find it disturbing and dangerous. Now, here's the other thing I want to mention. Whether in the areas of religion, ethnic identity, or nationalism, they rake refuge in a renewed and purified tradition and quite often violence. So when we talk about fundamentalism, it isn't just necessarily religious, because when we hear that word, that's what we think. But an ethnic fundamentalism as well.
Right.
A national fundamentalism, which basically says my own narrow context is the standard for truth.
Right.
And I'm going to reject anything that may come in from the outside. So what this writer identifies, which obviously I think you agree with, is that the problem is between, well, being open to a large world or circling the wagons and defending our small world. Is that fair?
Right. Yeah. And he's talking about he wrote this in the 1990s, mind you, as well too. So I mean, this is not this. He's thinking about this 25 years before all the stuff we're experiencing happened. He talks about there being centripetal and centrifugal, I can never say that word, forces, and borrowed from physics. The idea that sometimes there is a force that pulls things together into the center and makes them homogeneous, and then there's the idea of a force that sort of spins everything apart and sends it flying apart. And he talks about in the economic sphere, as the world becomes more globalized economically, each society around the world is becoming more homogenized. They're participating with each other in very similar ways, and their economies are operating in more similar ways. And that becomes disruptive for whatever local economy is making that transition into that world. And so on the one hand, we're becoming more homogenized. So we're all becoming more interdependent, and and our economies are operating in more similar ways. However, the flip side of that is that on the one hand, you have the weakening of local power structures because the economic factors are in turmoil, and that tends to affect also the social power, who holds the power in society. And what it often does is it frees up, I should add to this, globalization also means a shrinking of the world in terms of information, that now we are immediately confronted with information from other parts of the world we never knew about 30 years ago. The past 30 years, you're really seeing this accelerate. So we are continually confronted with other ideas, other ways of thinking about life, what gives meaning to life, that type of thing. So we are continually bombarded with that. And so locally, what you have is you have people whose voices previously have not been heard or heard well, now find themselves with broader platforms to be able to say what they understand the truth to be. You find people internationally, you begin to learn about people outside of your country and how they view your country and how they view your world, and how they view your culture, how they view their own culture, and all the interaction with that. And so for the person who has been feeling safe and secure, and I'm not talking about the United States, I'm talking anywhere in the world, who's felt safe and secure inside their cultural world that they've existed, these new exposures become threats. They feel like their world, and there is a sense in which that is true. Their world that they lived in is no longer going to exist. Something new is going to emerge. That's the case. And as Giddens is saying out, some of us are disposed to embrace that and see it as a wonderful thing and imagine new opportunities. Others, it is an existential threat. Yeah, I think that's the
and I guess I might as well just, full disclosure, I guess I'm a cosmopolitan. I love the diversity of the world and diversity of cultures. That doesn't mean I think all ideas and beliefs are created equal.
Right.
I just find the diversity to be exciting and interesting, and being in places in the world, and I know, but other people find that to be a threat, and I get that, because there are places where, in the change of the world, I sometimes I don't know, shudder a little bit, because it isn't the world that I've known. Right. So I get that. That.
And I just emphasize there, because to me, there's a dual dynamic going on. Let me just tell this story that I remember hearing Tony Campolo tell once years and years ago, and he's talking about a family, and the father and mother have worked together with these kids as they're growing up. The oldest one is now off to their first year of college, and they get this call early November, and they're talking with them on the phone, and then the student brings up, he says, "Hey, mom and dad," he says, "I'm thinking I probably won't be home for Thanksgiving. Some folks we're going to go skiing off, and so on and so forth." And mom says, "But you've always been here for Thanksgiving. That's the way we've always done it." He says, "Yeah, but I'd like to go with these friends." So they let him go off on a ski trip, and says that, so then Thanksgiving comes, the family's around the table, they're all celebrating, everybody's laughing, they're having these moments. But then at some moment during the course of the meal, there's this pall that falls across the table, because this child that was there all these times is no longer there at the table. And he says, you say, "Well, it's not the end of the world." And he says, "Yeah, it is. It's the end of the world that they created out of that family. But a new world is being born out of that." So even when change is good, and even when change is positive, there is still pain in losing stuff from the past. Yeah. And so I think I want to couch this as people who are resistant to change and people who are feeling lost because of change. It isn't all entirely because they're Neanderthals and they hate other people, and change is really happening, and it is really painful.
Yeah. I remember the first time my wife and I went on vacation without our 4 kids. That was because we were, that was and for me as a pastor being so busy, it was great to have that time. And that was a little rough. And but I mean, ultimately that change was good. Our children had grown up, and they had lives of their own. But it was still, one of the most liberating things for me years ago that I heard in this whole subject is that somebody said, the problem with change is not change. The problem with change is loss.
Yes.
Losing something, and a world, and by the way, when we get older, we do this too. I mean, think of all the sentimental posts on social media, right? The way things used to be. And, I remember when we were growing up, and, we had it great. And the kids today, they're just on their phones all the time. One of the things, and we've all done this, one of the things that cracks me up, though, is that if you go back and read ancient texts, 2,000 years ago, older generations are complaining about the same thing.
Exactly right. Yeah.
I was growing up in Pompeii, we had this and that. And these kids today, I mean, it's
Yes, right,
Oh,
right.
it's the same.
Yeah,
We always look at, one of the problems with memory, we all know, is selective amnesia.
exactly.
We kind of
Yeah.
forget the terrible stuff and we remember the sentimental stuff. And then, by the way, we use it to judge the current young generation.
Yes, of
And
course.
which is unfortunate. The poor millennials, we have beat up on these poor millennials
Right.
who are not inheriting a world that you and I had for them,
Right.
and that's not for the good.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
So yeah, we need
and
more.
I was trying to think of who the guy was. He talked about, he says, anything when I'm 15, anything that is in the world when I'm 15 is the way that it has always been and has always existed.
Yeah.
He says between 15 and 35, anything that comes into the world is the latest great invention, and I can probably get a job working in an industry dealing with that new great thing. Anything that comes into the world after I'm 35 against the world is against the natural order of things and must be stopped.
Yeah, this is exactly right. This is what we do.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the change. I mean, because there's
Yeah.
change happening. And it's global change. I want to focus on our context.
Yeah.
In America, part of the problem with globalization is, part of the challenge, let me say challenge, for a lot of Americans with globalization is that the globalization is now in our house, if you will. That
Yeah. Right.
demographics, we see the changing population. Whites are still the majority, I believe.
Yeah.
When you add it all up,
If you're over,
say again.
Children, I say for children, they're the non-whites are the majority for people under 20
For
years
children,
old.
the non-whites
Yeah.
are the majority. So they say demographics is destiny. So we know what is happening, that we who are white, we still have a majority, but we don't have the unchallenged say so on how things are going to work.
Right.
And that's a problem. And I've had conversations with friends of mine who are white, who, they don't see this,
Right.
but I want to say to them as gently as I can, your angst about immigrants and other things is really angst about the fact that the world you have known, which is the unassailable white majority, is disappearing.
Right.
That's what's happening. Now, that doesn't make you a racist, right? That doesn't make you a racist. That doesn't make you a hater of Mexicans. None of that. But what you really, speaking of memes, I've seen memes on social media that says, I miss the world I grew up in.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And what I want to say is that is a meme. And again, I know the folks who post it don't realize it.
Right.
This is not what they are saying outwardly.
Right.
But what they're saying is, I miss a world if I have known it. And what was important? What was one thing about that world that's changing? It was a white power world.
Yes.
Right. Now, again, I'm not saying that makes people racist. But it's a changing demographic. And we have seen with Black Lives Matter, we have seen with other things that have been happening, the Keystone Pipeline. What we have seen is that minorities are gaining more of a voice, and they are doing what we do in a democracy. They're exercising it.
There you go.
That makes some of us uncomfortable. All right, let me stop there. Go ahead.
No, I'm fully in agreement. I'm basically just nodding with everything you're saying. I think one of the things I found interesting is looking at the January 6th incident at the Capitol building. And I think it's Robert Pape, I think is his name, who did some research on the 400 people that had been charged with interfering with the Capitol. And I thought what was interesting was, he says, with a lot of these type of events that you see happen around the world, sometimes it's younger people. They can't get jobs. The economy is terrible. They're upset about the government, so they're trying to overthrow the government because they want more jobs. These were not younger people. So he says that's the first thing that this was not. He said another one is you get a bunch of lone wolves, a white supremacist kind of organization, and you got these lone wolves that are part of militias and all that type of thing, and they get their act together and they try to stage these things. Well, he says almost none of these people had any connection. There's a small percentage, less than 5%, that had connections to white supremacist group. And he said, and the other thing is that most of these people were in their 40s. The median age was like late 40s. They were overwhelmingly white. They were entrepreneurs. They were law enforcement people, firefighters. They were people that are sort of in your basic middle class. But he says the thing that they had in common is that they were from locations, from counties that have been trending heavily towards Biden or the Democrats, and have experienced large increases in numbers of non-white people living in their communities. And I know that when I looked at demographic data talking about in the election in 2016, what were the things that corresponded most with people who voted for Trump and for the Republicans in 2016? Number one was, were you Republican? So a lot of people just pulling Republican label because they're Republicans. That was the number one thing. But the second highest correlation was the issue of America is about to become a white minority country. How do you feel about that? Overwhelmingly, the single highest correlation, people who felt negatively about that were the people that voted for Trump. That was the second highest correlation behind being a Democrat. So there is this fear and angst that a world where white men may not be totally that, but they are the dominant forces in society, the ones controlling things, calling the shots. That is going away. It's disappearing.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Let's kind of move into that other, in a sense, move from globalization to nationalism, which is the response to globalization. The idea that America is first, which often, by the way, I think within the last decade, particularly, America first really means America only. The way that it works out. And, the problems, it isn't that, by the way, it isn't that as an American, you can't care for America, right? It isn't that you can't, it isn't that you can't say, hey, we do need to tend to the needs of our folks. Yes. Sure. I mean, obviously that's not, we're not saying that's bad, but we're saying that it's based on the nationalism. Well, first of all, if you talk Christians and nationalism from a Christian perspective, it's a problem. We do need to talk about that before we get out of this conversation. But the problem is that nationalism is speaking to a world that really no longer exists. Yeah. I mean, because I don't care how many ways you slice it, you can't go back to a national economy. You can't say, buy American. I mean, because what does that mean? I mean, buy an American car. All right. Is Ford an American car?
Right.
with parts from Canada. Is Toyota a Japanese car with parts from Marysville, Ohio, which has a Toyota plant? I mean, so we're trying to, it's almost as if with this, we're trying to bring back an economy that actually not only no longer exists, but it cannot exist. You can't bring it back. Right.
Yeah. And the world of ideas and entertainment, all those type of things too, that's coming from all over the world. The internet, there's no way that you can stop other ideas being exposed to other ideas. It's the idea that we're just going to have this one set of values in the United States and everybody toes the line on that set of values. You can't block out what the rest of the world says to you. There is going to be interaction. And increasingly, what the rest of the world does also has an impact for America. And I do want to emphasize the point you're making, which I think is a second ago there, which is a tension that we have to think about ethically. We as individuals don't live as part of a community of 9 billion people. At the extreme, we do that. We first of all live as families, as communities, as families, and then families that are part of voluntary associations, and then beyond that, families that are part of neighborhoods, and then are part of communities, and then are part of states. And so there is sort of a decreasing level of intensity of relationship in what we have. And so the idea that we should think that we don't have some special obligation to the immediate communities that we belong to that is different from more distant communities, I think that's wrong. We do have an obligation to that. But it isn't a what do I want to say, egoistic, self-centered, it's all about me and I'm against everybody else. We are healthier and we thrive better when more extended communities that we're also connected to also thrive and also.
Well, listen, I'll tell you something else right now. and I'm thinking here of conservative thinkers such as George Will, Bill Kristol, who have argued from a conservative perspective that we should be generous in immigration. That you could make a case that America has flourished and prospered and more than other countries because we have been so welcoming and so generous toward people coming in, and they bring in new energy and work, and they want to make a life, and they're willing to work hard for it. And so from a conservative perspective, you can say we're better this way, right?
Right. Well, and I think even I love sort of, digging at some of these points, the idea we talk about, our fundamental rights to be able to work however we want, hire whoever we want, so on and so forth. So you can make the case that maybe we should have laws that prevent people from coming across the border to come here just to try to find work. But if I'm an employer and I want to hire somebody from outside the United States, who's got the right to tell me that I can't hire somebody from outside the United States? Why are you violating my personal
and that's
rights
something that conservatives used to argue for. So let's move to that real quickly, because we do have to talk about the phenomenon that I'm going to call Trumpism. And for those of you who are watching or listening and you've voted for Trump, don't turn us off, because we're trying to have a good discussion and we want you to be part of it. Part of the thing about the news is that, one of the other problems, by the way, it's conservatives and liberals, it's all across the board, is we don't want to listen to alternative voices.
Right.
And we often imbibe our news not for information but for confirmation.
Right.
So if my favorite pundit says something that I really disagree with, I know somebody in our local town here who stopped subscribing to our local newspaper because it's gone liberal. Now, if you've read my local newspaper, it's not gone liberal, but you get a couple of but if they're willing to at times publish dissenting voices, that's not good. We can't do that, right? Yeah. So don't turn us off. Let's listen. And if you disagree with something we say, send us an email. We're glad. And actually, we'll read it on air and we'll respond to it. But I do need to talk about Trumpism, because now let me preface this by saying I really resist, and we all need to resist, the comparisons to Nazi Germany.
Right.
Back in 2000 to 2008, when George Bush was president, the liberals had a wonderful time putting a mustache on him in posters and calling him a Nazi. George Bush, his policies were too neocon and a little too hawkish, obviously, at least from this perspective. But the reality was he's not a Nazi. Okay.
Yeah. Then Alan, if I could just add there, at least in my neighborhood, which votes overwhelmingly Democrat, I know there were at least 2 or 3 cars in my neighborhood that had the bumper sticker that had Bush with the crosshairs over his face and said regime change.
Yeah, exactly right.
Okay, so let's
move to Barack Obama, because Barack Obama gets into office, and guess what the conservatives do? A lot of them. Same thing. Put the mustache on Barack Obama, put it on a some kind of picket sign. And these characterizations are unfair. Okay, they're just unfair. Donald Trump comes into office in 2016, and of course, the comparisons to him and Hitler are also, I think, fairly widespread, right?
Right.
And anybody who reads my stuff or watches me knows I'm not a big Donald Trump fan, but that's unfair too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, but here's where I want to make a connection. This is what I said to earlier. These kinds of regimes, we'll call them, whether it's Nazi Germany, whether it's Stalinism in the Soviet Union and Putin now, whether it's Pinochet in Chile, all these dictators, all these totalitarian governments started because the people gave power willingly to a person with authoritarian characteristics.
Yes, right.
So what I want to talk about in reference to Donald Trump is not Nazism. That's not fair.
Right.
But he's a person, I think it's hard to deny that he has authoritarian proclivities.
Yeah, right.
And that is the problem. Now, let me say one other thing. I'm going to let you get a word in here, Michael. Don't worry.
Let's go. Keep going. You're doing great. Preach.
But one of the things that we do, Democrats and Republicans, liberals and conservatives do this, but they do it and they're wrong. If George Bush does well, let's go to COVID. Okay. A lot of conservatives, right? Mask mandates is authoritarianism. It's fascism.
Yeah, right.
Well, no, it's not. You may
it's
disagree with it. Fair enough. We live in a democracy, have at the disagreement. That's not fascism. It's just not. Stop.
Yeah.
I want to say to some of these people, just sit down before you hurt yourself, right? Just stop that. On the other hand, liberals who, for example, the Patriot Act after 9/11. Now, there were things about the Patriot Act I wasn't crazy about. I wouldn't call that fascism either.
Right.
I think that's unfair.
Yeah.
Authoritarianism. So we tend to say, if the other side does something I don't like and makes a decision or forces me to do something, that's authoritarianism.
Right.
Right. Whereas if it's our side, we say, well, it's good for people.
Yeah. Right.
Right.
Yeah. It's necessary.
We have to get past that. We need a lot more nuance. Authoritarianism has many facets. All right. So with that in mind, I want to suggest that my concern for Donald Trump. Now, let me say another thing. And I think you and I are fairly close in this area politically. Mm-hmm. I'm a swing voter, have always been a swing voter. But over the years, up until the last few years, I have voted most of the time Republican.
Yes, me too.
And particularly for president. Let me say this.
Right.
I voted for Joe Biden in 2020. And the reason I did was because, as far as I was concerned, Donald Trump needed to go. Okay.
Yeah, right.
In 2016, I couldn't vote for Trump, but I didn't vote for Hillary Clinton either because I've got issues with the Clintons.
And what do I do? Yeah.
Yeah. So I voted down ticket, but I didn't vote for president. Okay.
Yeah.
So when I'm saying that to say Joe Biden was the first Democrat I had voted for president since 1992, Bill Clinton's first term. Okay.
Right.
So, so before people say, oh, you're just a liberal, right? That's not true. I've actually been, the reason is I have voted Republican more often than not is because I've been attracted to federalism.
Yes, right.
I mean, I like the idea. I think it's generally right, not all the time, but I think it's generally right that local communities know what's best because they're living it on the ground. So why should the federal government in certain places tell the states what to do? And why should the states in certain places tell Ashland County, where I live in Ohio, what to do? Okay. So I've been attracted to federalism. My frustration with when I'm going to call the Trump Putin wing of the Republican Party, because that's what it's become.
Right.
Not all Republicans, the Trump Putin wing. Mm-hmm. Boy, federalism is just not on their radar. They are not federalists anymore. They have truly become authoritarians. Ron DeSantis, who is trying to out-Trump Trump, and what he's doing in Florida. This is, Ronald Reagan would have decried this.
Right.
He would have decried this and said, no way, you let the local communities make the decisions. And if you don't like it, that's fine. But that's what federalism says. Federalism says, let them make the decisions they feel is best for them. And you stay out of it. All right. Now, Michael, what do you say?
I'm agreeing with everything you're talking about. And the issue of federalism has always been central to me for many years, going back decades. I will tell you, I was a Republican committeeman for 10 years in my neighborhood. And I worked with candidates that were local candidates, and especially for local candidates who were not white, who were working to become part of the Republican Party, who felt sympathetic with Republican values of decentralization, personal responsibility, those kind of things. And I would not really campaign for Republican candidates in our area unless they would come to the neighborhoods where I live and talk with people who were not white and were running for office. So I was very much involved with Republicans going back 15, 20, 25 years ago, in even more than just voting in that direction. So yeah, I've got that history, but a big part of that is the federalism you're describing. But I think another key piece of this, though, that I would add to it, which is the part that just turns my stomach about a lot of what happens, is that also a part of federalism is that the power is supposed to be distributed. But the other part that is that government is supposed to be limited. And part of what's going to keep society whole and thriving is the character of the people who are in the positions of power. And that the private institutions of society are supposed to be promoting and developing people with character. And then they are the ones who exercise leadership in those positions. Now, you can talk about, have Democrats been stellar examples of providing that? No, they have not. And you mentioned the Clintons. I'm sorry, I've got progressive friends who just appalled that Hillary Clinton didn't win. I was never thrilled about a Clinton presidency. I'm not exactly thrilled about Biden, but hey, based on what you're talking about earlier, the issue is, I forgot where I was going with that. I think the issue for me
is character. You're talking about character.
Yeah. The issue of character. And so instead of, I think it's Richard Rohr here. I don't know if he coined this phrase originally, but he says the best criticism of the bad is the practice of the better. Yeah. And if you read what Jesus says, he says, you have heard it said, but I say unto you, you have heard it said, but I say unto you. So this idea is that the Christian witness is that we're supposed to be modeling that which is better in the face of that which is worse. Yeah. With Christianity, with evangelical Christians in 2014, there was a poll, I think it was 2014, might have been 15. And it asked, is character important in a leader, and particularly political leader? And evangelicals ranked the highest of all of the subgroups that said that character was important. The same poll was taken 2 years later in 2016. Evangelicals ranked the bottom. They were the ones least likely to say that character mattered in terms of the leadership. Yeah. And so what you have is a complete abandonment of both conservative views of the idea of federalism with people with character, electing people with character. In fact, not only did they just say abandon character, they looked at what was going on with Democrats and said, here, hold my beer. You want crazy? I'll give you crazy. So it's
we'll make Bill Clinton look like a choir boy.
Exactly right.
Yeah,
and so,
exactly.
So that's been the direction that it's been going. So both as being politically conservative, about federalism, character, so on and so forth, the Republicans have abandoned that, and then white evangelicals have abandoned the idea that character makes any difference at all.
Yeah, I have said to people, one of my big issues with Donald Trump is not that he's conservative, but that he's not.
He's not conservative. No.
Other than a couple of hot button issues that conservatives have tapped into, he is not a conservative. He is he's an authoritarian populist, and I would use that his kind of authoritarianism is incoherent, and all you have to do is look at what Ron DeSantis is doing to know of the incoherence of all of this stuff. Now, let me say a couple things here in response to that. First of all, I think what you see happening in Florida, I think what you see happening in certain states where they're saying protect the vote. I'm saying suppress the vote, because that's really what it is.
Sure.
Is they're making these authoritarian moves because they know they no longer have popular sentiment.
Yes.
So in order to stay in power, they have to find a way to keep the population from voting them out. Right.
Correct. Yeah.
Now, you and I probably agree on this, that it may take a couple of election cycles for this to happen, but at some point, these folks are going to lose. At some point, there's just they're going to be out of power on the outside looking in. Yeah. And the Republican Party will then have to have a come to Jesus moment.
Yeah, right.
And decide who they're going to be. Let's move. Go ahead.
And can I add to that? It won't be just the Republican Party, but conservative Christianity having attached themselves so thoroughly and wholly to this particular view. Yeah, already the view, particularly among younger adults, about being a Christian is just plummeting. The polls show that to people who want to identify as Christian is plummeting, and a big part of it, when you look at particularly young adults, people under 35, they're voting more Democrat. But when you look at the internals of the polls, it's not because they're particularly thrilled about Democrats, but they are so appalled at what they see as and in Christianity, conservative Christians have identified themselves with that ethos, and it's going to be
So let's
ugly.
talk about this issue with character, because this is, you're now in my wheelhouse.
Yes, I am.
I have been appalled by, and I can, Bill Clinton. I mean, I remember, not you remember in his second term, his shenanigans, and of course, his apologists saying, "Oh, it's just about sex," and they're trying to justify him. And I always said, I said to some of my friends I've known who, when he was going through all of that, and they were defending him, and they were now excoriating Trump. I said to them, "You have no integrity." So right. I don't want to hear you, because, but as you say, those who are more conservative evangelical were appalled by his behavior.
Right.
Now you're getting, I like the one in 2000. I like the one when people would say, "Well, he's not going to be my pastor in chief," which I want to say, in which anyone ever thought the president should be a pastor, right? I mean, to me, that's like an irrelevant justification, right? Or then you get, here's the one I like too: nobody's perfect. Okay, so yeah, like I said, I can't vote for Trump because I'm looking for the perfect person. So these are responses that are just irrelevant.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
My frustration is, you've got like Franklin Graham and others using the Bible to basically say, like Trump is King David, because, King David committed adultery with Bathsheba. Well, first of all, it wasn't adultery, it was rape, because he was the king and she had no choice. But I want to say, all right, finish that story about what happened. Nathan comes to David and points out his egregious behavior, and there are consequences. What are the consequences? Nathan says, "The sword will not depart from your house." What does that mean? It means that your kingdom down through the generations, it's going to be beset with violence. That is the penalty for your lack of character, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And so it's like, wait a minute. I've read the Bible. My dissertation was on character.
Wow. Yeah.
In the New Testament, right? It's like, you're using this stuff to justify. No. There is a character test as Christians. But by the way, I've said before that I would vote for a person who has impeccable character, whose politics I disagreed with vehemently, as opposed to someone whose politics I agreed with and was a scoundrel.
Right. Yeah.
Because in the midst of a crisis, I would trust the person of character.
Yeah.
I wouldn't trust the scoundrel.
Yeah.
All right. So I just get frustrated because we take these texts, it's proof texting. We take a text and we get out of it what we want, and okay, therefore it's now okay. Wait a minute. Read the bigger picture and read what Jesus says about character. Read what Paul says about character. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff about, people have written books on lessons in leadership from the Bible. And I have yet to read a book on leadership from the scripture that says the Bible teaches character really doesn't matter.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Well, and you talk about politics and some of these decisions, another one of the things as well, they're both, neither one of them are good. Everybody's flawed. I went for the lesser of two evils. Okay. And I may not agree with you that Trump was the lesser of two evils. But the issue is, you just said lesser of two evils, which means the person that you elected is also evil. And as a Christian, you have a voice and you have to speak out when evil is said and done. And instead, what we hear is that when evil is said and done, this is the greatest president the United States has ever had. Isn't it so wonderful that he says the things that I'm thinking? So and so, we do not hear the Christian voice that says, calls evil evil when it happens, calls the things that are wrong. So I sympathize at the margins of the idea of voting for the lesser of two evils, but that does not absolve you of the responsibility to speak out when things that are wrong are done.
And here's the other thing is, we really need, if we're going to be, we need to not give our own kind a pass. One of the things that bothers me, and by the way, it's a human temptation, we're all there. I tend to want to be easier on the people I like and agree with than the people I don't. So, when my politician, misbehaves, I may not say that's okay, but I'm going to go a lot easier than if it's your politician. When it's your politician, it's inexcusable. We need to quit that. I remember George Hunter, author, I think he's retired now at Asbury Seminary, a Christian writer. He, in one of his writings, says that both the Democratic Party and Republican Party need Christians in both parties that will hold their own side accountable.
Right.
Because it becomes real easy. It becomes real easy for Joe Republican and Jane Democrat to point the moral finger at the other party.
Right.
But when we point it at our own and say, this is one of the reasons, by the way, I have absolutely paramount respect for Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger.
Right. Yeah.
These are two Republicans. Anyone who knows Liz Cheney, whose dad is Dick Cheney, right? No one who knows anything about Liz Cheney would even remotely accuse her of being liberal, right? Yeah. She is as conservative as you get. And yet she has had the moral courage to stand up and say, no, this is not the way America works. Yeah. We do not base our society and our elections and our futures on lies, particularly big lies, such as election fraud. We don't do that. That is what I want in leadership. And that's, by the way, what I want from both parties. Exactly. This is what I want. Right. Yeah. And Liz Cheney is not perfect. I'm sure she's got to go and ask forgiveness like the rest of us. Right. But she has the courage to stand up and do that. And all I can say is, may her tribe increase.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, exactly. I don't know where it's gonna go, but definitely she has been to me, a hero in that respect. And I gotta say, I'm not a big Dick Cheney fan. I'm not particularly, before was not a big Liz Cheney fan. Yeah, yeah. Because of this particular, her particular convictions on this, she is representing my convictions and what she's doing there. I was also going to say, one of our earlier conversations we had, I can't remember what the topic was, but we did bring up the thing, I think, where George Bush talked about, we tend to judge our enemies by their worst example and our comrades by their best intentions. Yeah. And I think that's the danger, is trying to be more balanced. Yeah.
I should have silenced my phone. I apologize.
That's not a problem.
I need to go in timeout. Sorry about that. It's now silenced. Anyway, no, you're absolutely right. And again, it's a temptation for all of us. So we're not pointing fingers here, as much to say that if I'm opposed to something, I find the worst example and I hold that up. And then, but if somebody does that to me, I say, well, that's the worst example. That's not the mainstream. That's not the trend. Yeah. Got to stop doing that. And we need to, if you and I disagree on something, what I need to do is to bring before you the best examples of your position so that you can clarify and not caricature, right, what it is that you believe in. Yeah.
Right.
So,
yeah.
So, so by the way, let's just say, as we close here, you and I both like democracy, right? I mean, Ben Franklin, it's of all forms of government, it's the best of the worst, right? Yeah, right. It's not perfect. One of the things I love to say about democracy is that the great thing about democracy is that everybody gets a voice and vote. Yeah. The bad thing about democracy is that everybody gets a voice and vote, right? Well, but that's what we do.
Right. And I think you and I had this conversation once before. The issue is, and it's interesting, I keep going back to some of my experiences I had doing some coaching with churches that were trying to revision and go to a new way of being and how they were going to be new congregations, that type of thing. And one of the challenges, if you change the way that a congregation functions, you're going to lose some people, because there's always going to be some segment of the congregation that doesn't want to go that direction. Others will love it. Others are going to be somewhere in between, but you're always going to lose people. If the people don't like it, they always have the option of going to another church. You can go elsewhere. In a nation state, you really don't have that option. The people that lose are still there, and they're still going to be there, and they're going to be a part of society. And what tends to generate resentment and extremism is that when people are in the minority position, feel that they no longer have voice, they no longer have weight and representation to make their voices heard. And so what's important about democracy is that nobody ultimately loses. Everybody has the opportunity through a democratic system to get people elected to represent their views and try to persuade society to their views. If you rig the election system so that people can't have their voices heard, which is how I perceive what the Republicans are trying to do, that only generates and fuels greater dysfunction within society. And so I come back to the idea, again, that the most important thing is making democracy and voting and so on as free and as open as we can possibly make it. Obviously, with safeguards, you don't want illegal voting happening.
Yeah.
But I do not perceive that, like you said earlier, I perceive that what's happening is this fiction of an election fraud in order to drive down the votes from people they don't like. So.
Yeah. And one other thing is you say that 2008, for example, Barack Obama wins, and immediately you get two things. You get Mitch McConnell saying our job is to see that he fails. We're going to block everything. Well, I'm sorry, that's not what the minority does.
Right.
Yes, you're the loyal opposition. You don't have to give the president whatever the president wants, but democracy has spoken, and so you have to work with what the majority has said.
Right.
I turn around, Barack Obama turns around and said, hey, we won.
Yeah, right.
So I want to say to both sides, see, this is not the way this works.
Exactly.
Yes, the Democrats won. They're in the majority. Republicans are in the minority. Okay, the people have spoken. Remember, whether you're in the minority or the majority, people voted for the other person.
Right.
People voted for the other side. Now you guys get together and do the hard work of government.
Right.
Which is not something we've had for a long time now.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, and I blame both sides for that. I don't just blame one side.
Yes, agreed.
Congress has become dysfunctional because it is chosen to be, because politicians on both sides are just looking to be reelected, and they're campaigning for the next election. So it's the fault of both sides on this.
I agree. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Michael, any last words for us? Any words of wisdom as we move into this time, as continue in this time of some upheaval?
No, I hope the conversation has at least been thought-provoking. I'm sure most anybody, liberal or progressive, who listens to this was probably upset by something that we said. But that's okay.
One of my practices is to read, watch, and listen to people I know I'm going to struggle to agree with.
Yeah,
I do not seek to insulate myself. I want to know what other people think, and I wish that's one thing I would just love to see us do more of. It's not easy. I'll admit. I'd much rather at the end of the day read someone who's going to confirm everything I already believe. But I also need to read people who are going to make me chafe a little bit. Right. Yeah. I mean, it's just because healthy democracy requires that. Healthy democracy requires that kind of conversation. Otherwise, we become tribal.
Right. Exactly. Amen.
All right, friends. Well, that's it for today. Thank you. Thanks again, Michael Cruz, obviously, for great stimulating conversation. And we'll be here next. Well, this is early May. We kind of missed April. This was going to be April, but technical difficulties. Basically the fault of yours truly. I will take responsibility.
No.
But this is our May episode. We'll come back in June. But thank you to Michael Cruz, and I'm Alan Bevere. And this is Faith Seeking Understanding University. By the way, I usually say this at the beginning and forgot. This is a place where everyone gets to come and ponder profound things free of charge. No cost to anybody. And remember, our patron saint here at FSUU is Anselm of Canterbury, who said, I do not seek so that I might understand. I understand, and then I seek. Something like that. That's a paraphrase. Anyway, Michael, thank you. And we shall see you soon. And take care.
Goodbye.